your transition to DreamWorks? Like how did you ended up at PDI DreamWorks or DreamWorks? Just kind of run that through for me. That would be great to hear.
So I came to America in '91 from the UK, where I'd been kind of a free, after the Muppets, I'd become like a freelance commercial artist, and I'd done lots of commercials. I'd done lots of storyboards for English animated TV shows like Count Duckula and Danger Mouse, and a show called The Dreamstone, and some specials, and some storyboards for feature film work. So that's kind of what I was doing in the UK. And then I was an overseas supervisor for a show called The DreamWorks, and went to the Philippines for a year. And while I was there working on my show, I met some people who were overseas supervisors from a company called Colossal Pictures in San Francisco. And we got on, because what would happen would be all the overseas supervisors would just have a beer in the commissary at the end of the day and exchange war stories. But then Colossal Pictures got its first animated TV show, which was basically making Back to the Future, the animated show.
Right.
And they were primarily known for doing MTV titles and kind of cool commercials, but they'd never done long form animation before. And so I got a call from one of the people I'd met, asking whether I'd want to come out to San Francisco for like 9 months and be an art director on Back to the Future. And I'd always wanted to go to San Francisco, quite honestly. I was more interested in San Francisco than the Back to the Future show, but I thought, sure, I can do that. And so that's what brought me to the States. And then after that, I was a staff director at Colossal Pictures after I finished Back to the Future for a few years. And then I went and worked with Henry Selick on James and the Giant Peach. And then I worked at Industrial Light and Magic. They wanted to do a fully CG version of basically House of Frankenstein. It was a new story, but it had Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, all the Universal monsters. And this was back in the late 90s. It didn't go anywhere. I think it eventually morphed into Van Helsing, the Stephen Sommers film.
Yep.
But originally,
the one with Hugh Jackman, right?
Yeah, but originally that was an all animated adult CG film that would have been. And there's a test somewhere of a CG Boris Karloff that ILM did in the late 90s. That would have been a very cool thing if they could have pulled that off. Anyway, it didn't happen. And then I think after that, I kind of got sexy for like 15 minutes, as sometimes happens. And I got a call from Pixar whether I'd go and be a head of story on, I think it was Monsters, Inc. And then literally that week, bizarrely, I got a call from DreamWorks 2 days later or something, to be head of story on a film called Tusker, which was about elephants. It's set in Asia. It's a film, sort of a cursed film that has never got made. It's been tried a few times, and for some reason, it's a great idea, and it's just never happened.
I remember, actually, now that you mentioned that, I remember when DreamWorks started, they put out a slate for all these projects that were going to come out. And that name rings a bell, and the elephant concept rings a bell.
Yeah.
Among many other things. What was the concept? I mean, unless it's confidential, I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's God knows, it's so long ago. So that was what. So anyway, I got this weird thing where I had to sort of is Pixar or DreamWorks trying to choose, and it got very difficult and complicated because they were both, I was very fortunate. I didn't have a bad choice to make, and they were, both places were incredibly gracious, and they gave me tours, and they showed, and I really had a very, very hard time choosing. And at the end of the day, I just decided I liked the elephants story more. It was kind of the Dirty Dozen with elephants. It was like elephants on a mission to try and save their herd from poachers. it meant that the elephants had to do all this kind of crazy stuff that elephants really shouldn't do, like
Right.
going over mountains and sneaking through villages and all this kind of stuff. And Tusker was this. It was set in Southeast Asia, but Tusker was an African elephant, so he was this big, giant, grizzled Clint Eastwood war elephant kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found it really appealing, and I've always loved Southeast Asia. I've done a fair bit of traveling in Southeast Asia, and I'm always very comfortable in Southeast Asia, where it doesn't matter which country I am. I kind of just feel like it's one of the places in one of the parts of the world where I kind of feel very comfortable and relaxed. Not always true in other parts of the world, but all the countries I've been to in Southeast Asia, I've always enjoyed. And I've always, I like the food, I like the people, I like the countryside. So it just appealed, and I like elephants. So that was the reason. And then that film wasn't ready. So they said, would you work on Shrek until Tusker's ready? And I was supposed to be the head of story on Tusker. And
Right.
so they said, would you mind just working in the story department on Shrek? And I was like, fine, sure.
I basically cold called into DreamWorks because my friends were working there and just said, hey, can I come in and show you my short? And, that's the beauty of a nominated film. And I got my foot in the door and showed my film, and they hired me and gave me a 2-year contract to develop projects. And it was Bill Dumashki who brought me in.
Okay.
And, I played my film, we sat in the theater, I played it on 35. It was a really exciting moment. And right afterwards, he got on the phone, he made a couple of calls, and then he gave me a couple of scripts, and they asked me to write notes on scripts. And I met with Jeffrey, and it was like, it was a time where they were really kind of trying to expand their roster and trying to bring in talent to try to diversify the ranks. And so they saw me as a filmmaker with a voice, and it was a really interesting moment. And so I met John, I met a handful of other directors there that were sort of in the same, boat, going from shorts or series to features,
Sure.
like, kind of developing things. And over the course of that couple of years, I was, just learning about the process and learning about how features worked, how CG worked, and learning about how they did things at DreamWorks. And I shadowed a bunch of projects, was really exciting. And then ultimately, I was constantly being asked to write notes on projects, and I had written a set of notes on Kung Fu Panda that were, I guess, pretty succinct and to the point, and pretty spoke to those that were looking for, a way forward, because the project sort of had a high concept.
Sure.
And they had some ideas about it, and I'm sure all those stories at this point, but I was writing from a point of view, looking at it going, wow, there's this amazing potential for this film. And yet, it did seem like it was in search of a way, and in search of a story, in search of, sort of a unique approach. And I think at that time it was being thought of as Kagamusha, like it was being thought of as a kind of a parody of the genre and a parody of martial arts films, and kind of like how Shrek skewered fairy tales, and it seemed like that I was like, well, why not make a great martial arts movie, and that was the thing that I saw Hero, and Hero blew my mind. And I had been a fan of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and so I was like looking at it going like, there's a real opportunity here. And so, like, I guess I just had a unique perspective, and it was towards the end of my 2-year development contract that I wrote those notes. And then I actually took a break. I walked away because I got a Guggenheim Fellowship to do another short film. And so I was kind of leaving to go do that. And eventually they asked me to come back, and if I wanted to join the project. And Melissa Cobb was just coming on as the producer at that point. And when they also told me that Jack Black that was the moment where they had asked Jack Black if he wanted to do it. And I was a huge Jack Black fan, like from the beginning of
Mars Attacks. I think that was his breakthrough career.
Well, I was a huge fan of Tenacious D,
Mm.
and I was like Tenacious D was the thing that really got me going and interested in him, in Kyle, and what Jack was doing, and even but yeah, Mars, I remember him from Mars Attacks, but I think it was Tenacious D was the thing that really got me going. So so knowing that Jack was involved, and knowing that there was this opportunity because Melissa was coming in too, and I don't know if you've spoken to her or
No,
not.
I've not. No.
Oh, she's amazing. And so there was this real opportunity to sort of take a step back and take a big breath about the project, and sort of find a direct, direction for it that could ultimately, hopefully, go in a more interesting and exciting direction.
I know you were at DreamWorks for a long time before you directed your first. You did Father of the Pride episodes, I think, right?
Yeah, the way it worked at DreamWorks was, at least this is how this was my understanding.
Sure.
You could confirm this with Jeffrey, but it was my understanding at the time I was there, which is sort of, I started in I think 98. I think I joined DreamWorks, and I was there, and I think I left in 2009. So it was there for sort of like 10 years.
Yeah.
And in sort of like the early 2000s, if you wanted to direct at DreamWorks, you had to go ask Jeffrey. You had to. They weren't going to come and ask you. You had to go to put yourself forward. You had to make the case. I want to be a director. I think I've got what it takes. I think I'm ready. And then you had to be prepared for Jeffrey's answer, because Jeffrey was kind of like, Caesar. It could be, or it, and the thing was, if it was, like Jeffrey's yes and no in story, that was it. That was your answer. You might get told, I'm never going to make you a director. I like you as an animator or a story person and whatever, but I'm not going to make you a director. And so that was kind of part of the ritual, which was, do you really want to know?
That's fascinating.
And a lot of people didn't want to know. A lot of people, I think the idea of being told, I'm never going to make you a director was more off-putting than not knowing. At least if you don't know, you can imagine it might happen. If you go ask, and because as you know, Jeffrey's very direct, and Jeffrey goes, nope, that's never going to happen. Now you got that answer, and what do you do with that? You either stay and know that you can never be that at DreamWorks anyway, or you have to leave and try it somewhere else. And that was.
So did you ask him for Father of the Pride?
No. You don't. I just went and I thought, I want to know. I want to know that or that. And so I just presented myself to Jeffrey and said, I want to direct. I think I'm ready. And that was kind of basically it. I didn't really need to say anything more. Jeffrey knew the reason I was having the meeting. So there was, in my memory, it was a short meeting. There was sort of a pause where you kind of go, uh-oh, you're waiting for the, and then in my memory, he sort of went, okay, that can happen. I need you to show me some stuff. And that was it. That was the end of the meeting. And what that meant was up to me to decipher. Yeah. So then I went through a period of trying to figure out, what do I need to show to prove that I'm ready. So I was industrious and positive, and as full of team spirit as I could be, and beetled around trying to be a good soldier and all of that. And then at some point, I remember it was up at PDI. I was told to go and meet Jeffrey. He would come up like every week and have a sort of visit with PDI. And so one of his meetings, I think, towards the end of the week, as I remember, I was told to meet Jeffrey, and I went to meet Jeffrey, and he said, you're going to direct the pilot episode of Father of the Pride. I want you in Glendale at 9:00 on Monday. there was only one required answer, which was yes, and that was the end of the meeting. It was done in like 2 minutes. I just went, okay, and nothing else was said. I left, and I was on the first flight out of San Francisco down to Glendale on Monday morning to start, and it wasn't. It was. I think the thing that was understood was you could always say no if you were offered something,
Sure.
but you would never be offered anything again.
Again.
So Father of the Pride was not necessarily the thing I wanted to do. In fact, the project I really wanted to do at that time was Monsters versus Aliens, which was not called Monsters versus Aliens because I love monsters. I had a different name. It was based on, or at least the original version was based on a comic book, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was a monster movie. And I just love monsters. So that was what I wanted. But Steve Hickner, who is very, very, cool and smart guy, he once gave me a great piece of advice. And his piece of advice, which I remembered in that meeting with Jeffrey, was never turn down a battlefield promotion. So whatever the job was, you said, yes, sir, I'm on it, and whether you liked it or you didn't like it, it was up to you to make it work. And so, I worked on Father of the Pride. I did the pilot. I obviously didn't screw it up too horribly. So they asked me to do some more episodes. And I was directing the season finale. I think I directed 4 episodes. The pilot, the Thanksgiving episode, and something else, and I was working on the finale. And they came to me. I think this was, my memory is it was like around Christmas 2003, and they said, that the Kung Fu Panda was Kung Fu Panda was in sort of pre-production it wasn't in development, it was in pre-production. It was greenlit. And it had 2 directors and a producer, and it wasn't going great, and they were going to make a change with one of the directors, and they came and asked me, and it wasn't just me, I'm sure they asked a bunch of people who'd gone to Jeffrey and asked for a shot. They said, do you want, would you be interested in being considered for Kung Fu Panda? And I needed to sort of write a proposal on how I would make it different and better than what it was at the time. And I did, and I guess I think after Christmas, I was told that I got the job. And I think I officially started on Panda in March 2004. So that's how I got Panda.
Jonathan mentioned one of the things that I asked him, and tell me about your story.
Sure.
I asked him, how did you get involved in directing Kung Fu Panda? And he told me the thing with DreamWorks was, what Jeffrey was, that you have, if you went up to Jeffrey and you said you wanted to direct something, and if he said no, then that's it. You can never ask him again.
Right.
And he went up to him and he asked him, and Jeffrey said yes, and he gave him his blessing. What was was it similar story or something different?
Well, this is kind of an interesting. So when I was, so I did my 2 years where I was developing things, and I was learning about politics the whole time I was developing. And I think I was at the tail end of my 2 years. I felt like I wasn't sure if it was a fit for me. And I wasn't sure if it was a fit for my sensibilities. And I remember they asked me to write notes on Kung Fu Panda, and I was looking at it at that time. And I think it was actually before John joined the project too. And I think at that moment, it was a different set of directors. And I looked at the project, and I think because I was I wrote the most honest notes I think I had written in my, my time there.
Right.
I didn't couch anything, and I didn't like, and again, I wasn't trying to get anyone in trouble. I just was like, well, here's what this could be. And I kind of approached it, and I wrote very succinct, and I think it allowed me to write a notes from a different point of view than in the past. I'd written notes. I was like, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. And I just kind of was a little more direct. And I was like, here's the opportunity. Here's what's not working with the current project. And here's where I think it could go. And it was in that moment that I think, I never said I wanted to be a director, but that was the whole premise of my contract, was that I was being groomed to be a director for a project.
Sure.
But I think it was that set of notes that Jeffrey saw and thought of me as a director. When he saw that, I think he thought of me as that. And so eventually when they came back and said, hey, we'd like you to be involved in a discussion about the movie, I went to the discussion, and my notes were brought up as part of the discussion. And so I thought, oh, okay. And I was gone at that point. Like, I didn't have an office anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I packed up. But what's interesting is when they did come back and asked me to come back to the studio, they asked me to come back for a different project.
Which was, do you remember?
It was Monsters versus Aliens.
Okay. Okay.
And they asked me to come back on that. And Conrad was directing that. And that was a project I had actually developed. It had been called, it was based on a comic book.
I remember it had a different name.
It was called Rex Havoc. It was Rex Havoc, and that was the character's name. The main character was Rex Havoc. And anyway, I developed it into a place where they ended up sort of running with it, and Connor was on it. So I had affection for the project. It was very different than when I was developing it. But they asked me if I wanted to join that project, and I was like, okay. So I joined that project. But I had heard that they were interested in me for Kung Fu Panda, so it was really a little bit odd. So when Jeffrey came to me and asked me to join Kung Fu Panda, that was the question. That was the question that I couldn't say no to. And it was like, we'd rather you be on this project. And that's when I started talking to Melissa, and that's when I met John, you know, like in the context of the project, met John. And that was the moment where it was described to me as, yeah, you're being asked to do this. Like, this is the ask.
So you better
say no to this ask, because in that moment, it was like, I think they had just moved the release date. It wasn't a sure thing. I was basically agreeing to join a project that was, in a sense, uncertain. And so it was like, do you want to join this uncertain project, even though you were on this other thing? And so I said yes again, and I gave you the reasons why. Melissa was great. I really liked her. Jack Black was great. And then the idea of sort of having this opportunity to sort of, start over again. And we started the process of rewriting with Jen Yu Nelson and the story team, like really driving if this could be anything, what could it be? And we were able to shed the problems that it had, and we were able to sort of work around it, because it was sort of, everyone was clear. That was the most consistent feedback, was what's there isn't working. So let's try to get it to work.
Cast that you guys had, right? That's one of the things with DreamWorks animation films, at least. I don't think if it's that like that anymore, but definitely was from the time of consent, like 1998, from Prince of Egypt up until probably like 2010. The cast was always big. Like, there was like, huge celebrities and actors.
Yeah.
How does that, on Prince of Egypt, that was more like a team decision, but Jeffrey Katzenberg, because he's Jeffrey Katzenberg, he made all the calls and arrangements, and he was able to get everybody. Was it similar with Jack Black, Dustin Hoffman, Angelina Jolie, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, basically, there really wasn't a plan B other than Jack, for Jack Black. Everybody wanted Jack, and Jack was on a hot streak at that time. And he'd done a voice in Shark Tale,
yeah,
the lead, but
I remember that.
And he'd also, I think, done a voice in Ice Age again, but not a lead. But everybody loved Jack Black, and was in, and everybody just thought he would be perfect as Poe. And there wasn't anybody we could think of who would, if Jack said no, that we would be happy with, And he didn't say yes straight away. I think he kind of was like, I've already done a couple of animated films. I don't really want to. But I think Jeffrey just, I think he came to us and said, okay, what's plan B? And we went, we don't have plan B. if it, we don't know who Poe is if it isn't Jack. And so I think Jeffrey just worked on Jack until Jack said yes, and then when we had Jack, then kind of everybody else, Dustin and Angelina and Lucy Liu and David Cross and Seth Rogen and Randall, Kim and Jackie Chan, everybody kind of just, it all fell pretty quickly, into place.
That's interesting. You mentioned that he didn't want to do another animated movie, and now he's still doing the voice for Kung Fu in the new series.
Well, at the time, I mean,
I'm just saying, right? It's interesting.
I mean, I don't know whether it was like I never want to do an animated film, or it may be like I've just done a bunch, and I want to try and do something else. But anyway, here's the thing that was kind of interesting was the Jack that we all fell in love with was and thought would be hilarious for Poe was the high fidelity Jack, that kind of slightly wise ass, snarky kind of guy. And originally that was how we were writing Poe, as kind of a smart mouth, kind of wise ass. And because we all thought Jack was hilarious in those when he played that. And it's my memory that when we were doing our first recording session with Jack, that was how we started. That was how we were directing him and how the part was written. And Jack did a couple of versions, I think, of some lines for a scene, and then he said, I check with Mark Osborne about this, but this is my memory of it, that it was Jack who said, I'd like to try this a different way, and we were like, sure, whatever you want, and then he tried this kind of more vulnerable, sort of self-aware character, as opposed to a lot of DreamWorks characters tended to be that kind of Teflon kind of character that was kind of cocky and snarky, and Jeffrey kind of had a lot of affection for characters that sort of tended to be like that. So you often found a lot of that kind of character trait in a lot of DreamWorks, leading characters. And Jack suddenly was playing Poe as this kind of rather vulnerable, somewhat insecure, character who is aware of their limitations, as opposed to the kind of the brassy kind of cocksure kind of character. And the thing was, it was again undeniable. As soon as he did that, we all went, of course, that's much better. That's so much nicer and smarter. It's much easier to get behind a character like that who dreams big but is aware that I can't be what I dream of. I've got these limitations in self-confidence, and physically I don't fit the mold of what I aspire to be. And just the way Jack played it was suddenly like, you feel for that guy. Suddenly he was everybody. We suddenly realized, oh, we're all Poe. We all have big dreams, and we're all falling way short of what we would like ourselves to be. And so instantly, and the writing, and John, Jonathan Abel and Glenn Berger, the writers, were always in the records. And I think as soon as we heard Jack do that, it like lights went off, and immediately they were rewriting Poe and rewriting the script, and Poe became the Poe that he is in the movie. In my memory, because Jack Black made that call and said, I think the cocky guy is not going to be as appealing as this guy. And he was absolutely right.
Well, the great thing about Jack was, like, it was really interesting. Like, I was a huge fan of his. I think School of Rock was like, we were looking at School of Rock a lot. Our first animation test was to do a clip of School of Rock. And I love that character a lot. But it was Cosmic Shame was the Tenacious D song that spoke to, like, I was a big fan of the D, and I could see a parallel between the character of Poe and the idea of what Tenacious D was sort of cultivating, and how they approach who they are as artists. And like, but there's a song by Tenacious D called Cosmic Shame that it's brilliant, because it's all about embracing being an artist and doing, like, putting yourself out there, but when you really love what you're doing, if you put it out there and you suck at it, it is more heartbreaking than anything you can imagine. So, and that's the cosmic shame, this idea that like, when you really love something, you really make yourself vulnerable if you put yourself out there, but that's the only way you're going to be great.
Yeah.
And the premise of the song is that Tenacious D, you know, there's basically asking you as art, asking everyone in the audience as artists to put themselves out there. And then they said, and if you suck, we're going to come and tell you to stop. And that's the great paradox that was. And I remember giving that, it was a live concert CD, gave it to all the story team. And I, you know, because to me, it kind of created this sense of like, again, possibility to this character that loves martial arts so much, but is so afraid to try it or so afraid to fail at it. And
That's all of us, right?
yeah, I know. And here I was like coming in going, I don't know how to make features. Like this is like insane. This whole process is like so much bigger than I am. And it was like such a learning process. And so it was like really scary, the parallel, but honestly, and I was afraid to tell Jack. I was such a fan of Jack's. I played it cool and I never told him what a fan I was until the very, very end. We were recording ADR. He was doing the last bits of dialogue to drop in. And I told him that. And I told him what a fan of the D I was. And I told him what a fan of that song I was and how that inspired. And he said, that's bullshit. He said, you're just trying to market the movie now. And the marketing team came up with this. And I was like, no, man. I'm like, no, it's real. And it was a really amazing moment because I've met celebrities before, met people I like heroicized before, people that I really looked up to, and I was always hesitant to say anything. And this was a time where I had restrained 3.5 years. I restrained myself from like geeking out. Like I was trying to be professional.
Yeah.
And I think when I finally did, it meant a lot. You know what I mean? Because there was something there that I think really helped. So when you talked about the character, I mean, we were creating like an approximation of a character that Jack in the early days we were, and he was snarky and he had attitude and like, we were painting a picture that he was amazing when he started coming and doing sessions, because at some point he said, I just don't want this character to be annoying. And he said, I want everyone to want to hang out with this character. And he really tapped into the vulnerability, and he really found he struck the right balance between the fanboy and the real like human aspect of that, like what happens when you really love something and you care about it and you're protective of it, but yet it still leaks out of you and it still drives you. It drives your desires, and your every waking moment is kind of driven, so it's sort of like, I think he really understood it. And it was fascinating too. One of our record sessions, like we were trying to kind of get him to a place and, understand like, oh, the Furious 5 are coming. And there was a moment where it was like seeing the poster, and it was like talking about like, you're seeing that. And so I was saying like, what if it's like a concert, like what if it's a poster for, I don't know, in my head, I was thinking AC/DC, or, I was thinking of the character that he plays in Tenacious D, and I was expecting him to come back with some like heavy metal, like a Dio or something. And he said Radiohead. And he was like, oh, okay. And he was thinking about Radiohead. And I just remember being like, wow, like there's so much more to Jack than we know.
Yeah.
And it was, he dug so deep, and I think he really created something really special, and we built on it. And that was the thing that was so exciting to work with him, because he was constantly like, we were workshopping it. It was never a situation where it was like, well, we need to do it exactly this way. Like he would always sort of absorb it and play with it. And he was an amazing collaborator, and he brought so much to the table. And so that character really evolved in this process of back and forth, and really giving him the chance to develop it. And with Dustin Hoffman, did John tell you about that session?
No, he hasn't. Please do.
Oh my God. It was one of the greatest experiences I think I had, because like normally you don't put the actors together.
Yeah.
And but we knew that something would happen if we could put them together. And we did for one session. We put Dustin and Jack, and they had never worked together. and they were both big fans of each other. So there was this really interesting dynamic. And we just thought, let's just do it. Let's see what happens. And we were really just like, and it was really early on in the process. So we were really still defining who those characters were. And it was really amazing because, oh my God, the stuff that, it was pure gold what was happening. But there was a really interesting, Dustin was worried that he wasn't funny enough to be working with Jack. Jack was worried that he wasn't a good enough actor to be working with Dustin. So they both were like, both were in this uncomfortable place. And at the end of the session, they both separately came to us and asked us they said, I want to redo everything. I wasn't really good today. And they were both so insecure about it, but we got gold. And we used so much of that session because it really, there was such a spark there. And there was such a human quality there because they were both trying to really meet each other,
That's so
as
cool.
artists.
That's
Yeah, it was
so
really
cool.
Yeah.
And you said it perfectly. Like, I think the fact that not in just this case, in any case, when actors or even directors or, musicians, when we think we have done the worst job, most of the time it's the opposite, right?
Well, it's like we're our own worst critics. And I
Yeah.
think, acting is particularly hard because like when you're doing it well, you can't see yourself. You can't both monitor your performance and come from a very genuine place, right? And so I think that's the thing. It's like so it's like you kind of lose yourself when you're really, and that's what I loved about working with both Jack and Dustin. It's like they would lose themselves and then they wouldn't know what happened. Like, they wouldn't, and they think that was the thing. It's like, oh no, what just happened? It's like kind of blacking out and then waking up, like, wait, what happened?
But I think that's a testament to the writing too, right? Like when the writing is really good, then you're not thinking about, okay, if the character is going to say this or that. It's just natural, and then they can sometimes improvise too, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it was like the script was always like it was always a place to play from, right? So the script, we always went into those sessions going like, look, this is kind of how we think this works, but let's see where it goes. And I remember the first time we recorded Dustin, he was having a hard time getting into the character. He was having a hard time kind of grabbing onto it because he also was like looking at the pictures of Shifu and he's like, I don't know how my voice comes out of this character, this little guy. And it was our second session with Dustin where we actually took his voice and put it into the character and he started to get it. So we showed him some tests and it was helping him. But the thing that unlocked it for him was we actually hadn't, from the first recording to the second recording, we had actually radically sort of altered, when you talk about the writing, we'd radically altered the course of the movie.
Okay.
In the first time we recorded Dustin, we were still at the place where Shifu was more of like a Mr. Miyagi, like a kind of a kind, old kind of, and he was kind of exhausted and exasperated, and like he was like, how am I gonna do this? And he was coming from a place of like kindness, and I think Dustin was having a hard time trying to understand the character or how to like what was there, and it was like. And so it kind of wasn't written right yet. And there was a point in the process where we were looking at the movie critically and trying to figure out like, why isn't it playing? What's wrong? Like something's not working. Sure. And Jenyu Nelson was the one to say like, there's not enough conflict. She's like, there just needs to be more conflict. And I'll never forget. And I said, well, what if Shifu wants to kill Po? Like, what if he like hates Po? And it was like, and it started this whole conversation about like, what if as soon as like Po is the one chosen, like what if his decision in that moment is okay, this guy's really into it, so this makes it easier for me to get him murdered. And then once he's murdered, then I can move on and get Tigris to be the Dragon Warrior, like I can kind of move along with like what I think it should be.
Right.
And when we went back to Dustin with that and we pitched that back to Dustin and I'll never forget it, Dustin went, so he's a prick. And we were like, yes. And he goes, I love it. And it was like, and it was the moment that like the character had texture too. Like, and it was like, and he came at it in such a different way. And then we were able to do the session with he and Jack. Like, so we were able to get them together once we had that breakthrough. But yeah, like that's what I loved about the process. It was a constant back and forth, like we're working together with the artists, working together with the actors, like kind of, you know, on this process of discovery to find the best version of the story,
Sure.
best version of the characters, the best version of what would come from. And so yeah, that took it took, you know, everybody was constantly, you know, you sort of comment on the writing, and it's like one of the greatest things about animation is like the final draft of the script gets written in the edit room, because the edit room is where all the ideas are coming together, all the raw materials that have come in from all the artists and everybody, like it all gets shaped in the edit room, and those performances get dialed in, and those attitudes get dialed in, and the animators are responding to the voices, and they're bringing ideas in. And so it's like everything kind of shapes and adjusts and comes together by really out of necessity of having to get it up on reels and get it to feel right and get it working and get all the, you know, get all the conflict necessary. You know, each scene needs that, you know, that force driving movie. And so yeah, I think it's a credit to the entirety of the team and the creative process, and honestly to sort of the studio for sort of recognizing, and you know, Melissa, Bill Damashki were sort of pushing this to be different. And Jeffrey, you know, I'll never forget it. Jeffrey was like, I don't get this character. I don't understand this character, because he couldn't relate to him, because he was like, he was kind of like a loser. Like he was kind of like, Jeffrey was just like, I don't get it. But he goes, it's working, so keep going. Like he would always support us by going like, I don't get it, but keep going.
That's a great quality of a leader.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was an interesting moment too, because it was sort of a turning point. I think people who had been there at the studio from the beginning, from the Prince of Egypt days, they said we haven't seen him lead this way on a project. Like usually he really rolls up his sleeves, and he really is in there. And this was the first time that they saw him really pushing for or allowing for the process to kind of generate something unique. And that was, I think, I always thought that was Bill Damashki's plan, you know, trying to diversify the kinds of movies they were making and the voices. And again, bringing in someone like me who came from, you know, making short films and came from more independent film, you know, sort of bringing in voices. And so it was an interesting experiment. And Jeffrey had all his focus on B movie. I don't know if you've ever heard this sort of, so we were sort of left to our own devices, because he was very busy with that and given us a lot of space to kind of find this. And like I said, like we kept hitting our benchmarks. We kept exploring something that was unique, and it was working for audiences. And so, yeah, we kind of kept just pushing it. And yeah, it was a really exciting, great learning experience, but a great process to sort of see how this could develop and unfold. And it was kind of the way I learned, you know, but like what I was describing about my shorts, where I was just kind of learning and by doing and making mistakes, you know. And so I think we were sort of doing that on a grander scale and giving all the artists involved something that they could love and believe in and feel great about. And I think that's what was really exciting about the whole process, that we were getting all this energy back from the artists, because they were so in love with what we were building and so inspired by what we were all collectively building. Yeah.
The opening sequence where it was more like an anime style and it was a dream sequence. What was the conception behind it? Was that something how did that originate to be different than the actual film itself? And who was involved in it? Was it you, or was it another team?
Well, when I got put on Kung Fu Panda, I made a wish list for myself of things I wanted to try and do on the film. And one of them was to put a 2D sequence into a 3D movie, which doesn't sound sort of radical now, but at the time it hadn't been done. I think Horton Hears a Who pipped us to the post they released first, and they had a 2D scene in their film. But that was I mean, partly it's because 2D animation is sort of my first love. That's where I trained, and so I still have probably the most affection out of all the sort of animation disciplines for hand-drawn animation. So partly it was a love of hand-drawn animation, and partly just I thought it'd be interesting put a different technique into to break up, the CG. The thing was, so I had this little, in my notebook, I had like, put a 2D sequence into a 3D film.
Right.
I wanted to shoot in widescreen in 2:3:9:1, sort of CinemaScope Panavision aspect ratio, which was not common at the time. There was still resistance to it because of home video, but we were just transitioning around that time to the 16:9 plasma televisions. So that kind of tipped the balance. But at the beginning in 2004, when we first kind of proposed it, there was some pushback because they preferred things to fit 4:3, without letterboxing. So, but I really wanted to, because all good martial arts films are shot in widescreen. Shaw Brothers films, Golden Harvest, so I definitely want to do that. I wanted to do a split screen sequence. I love those kind of 1960s split screen sort of things. And so those are just like a little bunch of wish things I thought it would be cool if I could try and do them. I managed to get all three eventually. We have a little split screen sequence in the training montage with Po and Shifu. We won the sort of the idea of shooting in widescreen. We presented to DreamWorks in 1:8:5 and also in 2:3:9:1, and it was obvious that it just looked much more elegant and handsome in the Panavision, CinemaScope aspect ratio. And the animated scene, was an idea that I just thought I want to try that, but I had no idea where it could go. I thought it might be a dream sequence in the middle of the movie or somewhere like that. And at some point it became, just blindingly obvious that the place to put the anime sequence was at the beginning, because one, it would be more surprising. People would come into a DreamWorks CG movie, and the first thing they see is not CG. It's kind of anime. So there would be more, surprise by starting the film out. But it was also, it just revealed itself to be like the perfect place, because we're starting with Poe's dream life. So his dreams are in a different style to the and in fact we were able to use what hand-drawn animation can do, which is anime in particular. And then Ninja Scroll was kind of our sort of, I think, our main influence, although we all love various animes. But there's some very particular deliberate tip of the hat homage shots to Ninja Scroll. Poe crossing the bridge is definitely a sort of a deliberate homage to a very well-known shot in Ninja Scroll. But the thing that sort of anime and hand-drawn animation does really well is defy gravity. Because it's hand-drawn, you can really push sort of unbelievable physics, if you like, in a way that is kind of acceptable in hand-drawn, and is sort of would look weirder because of the sort of the physics of CG often makes you sort of feel those things are sort of more unbelievable. So we were able to sort of have this kind of gravity defying dream where Poe was sort of unleashed, and he could take on hundreds of bad guys and fly through the air and use his chi to defeat the bad guys, and then use all the things that CG does really well, which is sort of textures and surfacing and make you feel sort of the weight and the reality of things, so that when he comes crashing back to Earth, literally falls out of his bed, we're in CG. And so now you get, hopefully, first of all, he's obviously in a very small kind of little room. He's been in this kind of grand epic adventure. Now he's in a very kind of small little bedroom, and he's fallen on the floor. And CG just helped us feel the weight and reality of his real life versus the sort of, the freedom and aspirations of his dream life. And so that was why we chose to have that anime scene. And then there was a lot of people on our crew, who came from 2D animation and really loved 2D animation, were really great, artists. Rodolphe Gwendon, one of our key story artists and animators, who was also in charge of getting the kung fu technically correct. He was a really bona fide martial artist. Was a great animator, and Jen New Nelson, who's head of story, one of the best drafts people in the world, just fantastic. So in the end, it got done with Jen. Jen directed that scene, and James Baxter, one of the great all-time animators. He had his own company at that time, and I think he'd been running it for a while, and he was sort of kind of done with it, I think. So we offered, this idea of doing this, and it was sort of a mix between his company and I think some of our animators and Jen directing. And anyway, it worked out better than I could have hoped. I mean, Jen did a brilliant job. James Baxter, master animator, his whole team, did great. All the animators, like Rodolphe, who wanted to work on it, did great. And I think it's part of the texture and flavor of what makes Kung Fu Panda, hopefully kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, James Baxter, I mean, I believe he also did the work on Spirit Stallion of Cimarron.
Yeah. I mean,
amazing.
Nothing harder in the world to draw than a horse.
And then to convey emotions, because he doesn't talk, right? That's another challenge. You mentioned Kung Fu Panda 2.39 by 1. It's funny because when I started watching Kung Fu Panda a few days ago on my TV, and then something interrupted me, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I'll just watch it on my monitor. And I have a 32-inch 235/1 monitor, and when it played on that, I was like, whoa, it's full screen, and there's no borders, and it's perfect, and it just felt so, and it felt so real because of anamorphic, right? And that's something you get with Quentin Tarantino movies too, like Hateful Eight and Kill Bill.
Well, yeah. I mean, we love Kill Bill. We were working on Panda before Kill Bill came out, so we all love Kill Bill, but we were drawing on the same kind of references that Quentin Tarantino was drawing on, his love of Golden Harvest and Shaw Brothers films. We were drawing on this, we were going to the same well for Kung Fu Panda because we loved all those films too, and we all had our favorite martial arts kind of films, but we were trying to get that aesthetic in the film. So we it was just kind of crazy that I think I remember going with Mark Osborne to like a sneak of Kill Bill and thinking it was great, and actually thinking it probably helped us, because it was sort of bringing that kind of sensibility and that kind of appreciation of great martial arts back. So I think Kill Bill, even though it's obviously the audience for Kill Bill is a very different audience for Kung Fu Panda, but it helped to put martial arts and that kind of choreography and that kind of filmmaking back in the public consciousness, sort of. So I'm a huge fan of Kill Bill 1 and 2, particularly the uncut version of Kill Bill 1. So I have a Japanese DVD of Kill Bill 1, which has the House of Blue Leaves in color, not in black and white as it is in the American version. In the Japanese version, you get to see the blood squirt in color, which is much better.
I gotta look into that. I didn't know there was one out there. I always find it. Sorry, go on.
Well, no, there is. I don't know if how easy it is to find now, but I've been waiting for like everybody else who was a fan of that movie, been waiting years and years. I don't know how long it's been waiting for the Kill Bill, the whole bloody affair where he was going to re-edit the two films into one magnum opus and put the stuff that was cut out to get the R back in, so, the undiluted version. I'm still waiting for that. Where's my Blu-ray, Quentin? I want that Blu-ray.
references to the older movies. I mean, I saw, for me, when I see, you talked about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, right? Like when I saw it, and I saw it when it came out, and I saw it again about a week before I spoke to Jonathan, just for, refresh my memory. And I definitely saw Yoda, right? Like 100%, I saw Yoda. But for me, the biggest thing was Karate Kid. That relationship between the teacher and the student, but at a completely different,
well, there was a whole period of time where, the earliest incarnations of it was far more Karate Kid.
Okay.
And I think it was hard to get away from it, because it sort of felt like the heartwarming way to go.
Yeah.
And but I think that was why that pivotal moment of going like, well, maybe he wants to kill Poe, like maybe he doesn't like
that
Poe.
changed things. Yeah.
It actually created an even more interesting opportunity where, Shifu disliked Poe and actually learned to like Poe out of the necessity of facing the greatest challenge of his life, which was to train this guy he didn't like and didn't believe in. And it sort of reawakens something in him that I think it's part of the power of that film, where it's like, he said like, Shifu's believing bone is broken when we meet him. He's a character that's broken in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And the story is about, really, it's his story of healing and believing in a student again. And believing in a student that is risky is a greater challenge to Shifu as a character. And to be able to believe in Poe, it puts him in a great deal of peril as an emotional character. And so I think that's one of the things I love about it. But yeah, there's some Karate Kid there. There's a lot of, we've tried to really look at a lot of stuff and trying to sort of find, because it's meant to be a tribute, right? It's meant to be, and in some cases overt, in some cases not so overt. But yeah, there was Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon was something we were looking at one point, and the idea of chi as a power, and the idea of like, and that movie is so completely in its own like, universe. But there was stuff that we learned from like exploring that, or, you always learn when you sort of break things down. Well, how did this work? Or how did this feel?
Yeah.
And then you got to go find your own way forward. But there was a moment early on where we were exploring like Poe gains chi and he has like magic at the end. And instead, it was far more interesting to sort of have Poe unleash all the things he learned from Shifu so that he makes the most out of the real practical bringing of himself and the bringing of Shifu's training and everything he's learned along the way, and allowing that to sort of come together in a way that feels more rewarding than magic, right?
I wanted to know, I mean, I have a general idea, and I think a lot of people do, but still at the same time, it would be nice to get a full scope without going into super detail. Like, what's the process once the script is done? From that point on, like, what's the story's journey? Like, which department it goes to, then which department goes to, then comes back, like that step. It doesn't have to be exactly, but just to get a sense of the flow, how things get made over a course of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, the sort of basic life cycle of a studio animated film, certainly when we were doing Kung Fu Panda, was that you would spend about 50% of your production time in pre-production, in story and development, and then about 50% in actual production. So we spent a long time. We spent like at least, I think Kung Fu Panda, I was on Kung Fu Panda for like 4.5 years. So we were in story for about 2 years. And and the key, really the key storytelling tool on animated film is the animatic. That is the actual blueprint for the film. I mean, it's almost the fine cut of the film before you make the film. So obviously a script is very important, but really an animated film evolves and finds its voice in storyboarding and in the animatic. So, I don't know how many writers worked on Kung Fu Panda. It was a huge number. I mean, I think it was something like 6 or 8, writers before we finally ended up with Jonathan Abel and Glenn Berger, who kind of clicked with us and our weird way of working and got it. And then that became a sort of very osmotic process between, you know, stuff that Jonathan and Glenn would write, and then that would go into story, and then story would develop it, and they would, you know, ideas would be created in the story department, and then it would go back for rewrites to, you know, Jonathan and Glenn, and then, you know, maybe back for more reboarding. So that's where we ended up. At the beginning, we went through a number of writers trying to find the right voice for the film and script, and it took a lot of people just didn't get it, or they didn't get the film that, you know, Mark and I and Melissa wanted to make, and all the people on the movie. So getting the right script for Kung Fu Panda took a long time, but we're always parallel processing. So while writing is happening, story development is happening. We have a crew of, you know, I can't remember, we probably came down to about 8 people eventually, but when we started, we had a fairly big story crew of, I don't know, probably maybe like 15, you know, and over the time we sort of came down to our sort of hardcore crew. And you know, and there's writing happening in storyboards. It's not television where, you know, there's a script and the story artists basically illustrate the script, and that, you know, story artists at DreamWorks and at Pixar, you know, they're writers as well as, you know, they just happen to, you know, they write in drawings, but they're writers, you know, as much as they are artists. And so, you know, lots of ideas are being generated in the story department as well as in the script, and then you sort of try and have to put the two things together. But there's this sort of 18-month, 2-year period where it's really the key department on the film is the story department, trying to find the film, trying to find the characters. At the same time, you know, the art department is trying to nail down the look of the picture and the character designs, environments and sets and all that stuff. And there's technical stuff like, you know, rigging tests and basic, you know, stuff happening. But the crew is fairly, you know, compared to what it will become, it's fairly small. It's sort of like somewhere between 30 to 50 people for, you know, 18 months, 2 years. And then at some point, when you've got enough scenes that have been approved by the studio, that they go, okay, we are now going to go into production. There's some kind of lever gets pulled, and you just balloon from 30 to 50 people to like 400 to 500 people, and all these other departments, like, you know, layout and animation and surfacing and lighting and all these huge departments now come, you know, are activated. And now you've got to feed the beast. Now the conveyor belt has to be, you know, sending a scene out of story into a rough layout, you know, then out of rough layout into sort of rough animation, and then into, you know, final animation, final layout, surfacing, lighting, you know, all those kind of steps. And it has to keep going. It becomes very, very expensive to stop that process, or, you know, you don't want to do that. It happens all the time, but you know, it's you don't want to do it. So there's this big critical moment where you move from being basically, you know, 2D, you know, storyboards and paintings, you know, even if nowadays they're done digitally, to the full digital world where you're working with 3D models in rough layout, and then, you know, rough animation, and then you know, final animation, and then surfacing and texturing and clothing and crowds and special effects and lighting and all the other technical stuff that comes on. You know, that's kind of the switch, and it's really, really important that you get your story sorted in that 18 months to 2 year period. You do not want to be fixing your story while some part of your film is in production. And it happens all the time, I have to say. It didn't really happen with us. We had found our story, so, you know, we didn't have any giant, you know, fixes to do. But it does happen on films. I've worked on films where, they suddenly realize that the main character doesn't work, or they got a huge problem in Act 2 or Act 3, and they have to sort of stop the machine and take it down and do a huge amount of fixing, and that stuff is always incredibly expensive and painful. We didn't have that. We had got our story, luckily. That the 2 years we'd invested in trying to figure it out, and by the way, not to sound like we're super smart, I mean, we got it wrong a lot at the beginning. We were all over the map. We didn't know who Poe was. We had all sorts of crazy ideas that never made it into the film, thank goodness, because they were terrible. So, probably the first year that we were working in story and stuff, we were just getting all our bad ideas out the way. And luckily we managed to do that. And then finally, we locked in on sort of the zero to hero kind of sort of sport movie template, and then overlaid that with sort of the martial arts.
When you transition from being an independent, filmmaker into going into this big studio, and from my experience as well, like I'm at that stage right now where I have made, films independently.
Yeah.
And part of me always wishes that I had a studio backing, but at the same time, it's a scary factor because there's all the bureaucracy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
How was that transition? Like, did it petrify you? Did you enjoy it? And would you like ever to go back into that independent world?
I mean, the independent world was, I think it was the right place for me to like explore. I was at CalArts, I was in the experimental animation department, and I kind of fell in love with it. I fell in love with like a broad spectrum of film, and fell in love with the animation medium because of its sort of limitless potential. And it kind of broke my brain because like the stuff I had experienced, the commonplace, the stuff that was readily available to me was, some of it was exciting, like I mentioned, but like there was all this other stuff. And so I really wanted to just explore and see what was possible. And I love the idea of mixing mediums, and that is sort of evident in a lot of the things that I've done. And I just like, I don't know, for me, the idea, when I came into DreamWorks, it was like, I want to learn about this process. I want to explore, but I honestly didn't know if it was going to be a fit. I didn't know if I was going to be able to sort of join a project and stay on until the end. And so I think Kung Fu Panda became a great experiment for me, because every day I wasn't just wanting to make a movie. I wanted to make a great movie. And I wanted to make something that would be a real departure. And that's like, there were so many things that were exciting to me. And then learning how to work with a huge team, learning how to work with executives, learning how to be conscious. I mean, I think we had the marketing, marketing drives a lot of choices and decision-making sometimes when it comes to these big animated movies. And the weirdest golden opportunity that we were given was, they knew they had a title, they knew they had a poster, they knew they had a character that everyone was going to love. Like there were so many things that were going for it, that the marketing, it was almost like they kind of knew it was a sure thing in a way. And there was like, just make it good, and like, we know how to sell it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gave us a lot of freedom, I think, to sort of try to find the best version of it, as opposed to the marketing team trying to tell us what it needed to be or anything like that. And to credit Jeffrey, he does create a real separation between marketing and filmmaking. So we were never pushed. But when you mention the difference between being independent and being like having a studio, like to me, that's the biggest danger, is that you're going to be told how to tell the story. And that is a danger, but I think in the best cases, if you're finding the right story and telling the right story, it's gonna make it clear like what the marketing needs to be, right? And then so there's all this benefit that comes from, like, I learned how to make animation and CG animation in like a Cadillac. Like it was like I got to drive like the smoothest running, like, it was such a great thing to not know. I never got my hands dirty with CG, so I had no idea like how hard it was. Like and we were working with some amazing artists, but what was going on was like hidden, like like when things break or when things weren't working, like very rarely was that shown to me. It was only shown to me like it was funny. And so I never quite had to get my hands dirty. And so I really had the great experience of really just directing and learning about the role of a director on a large team, and to get the support of, you know, an amazing team of artists to sort of help make something come to life. And it was like an embarrassment of riches always, like and so it was like guiding that process was really amazing. And so I've come away from that experience. Even my wife reminded me at the end, like when it was all done, she was like, you know, you just went there to gain experience. Like, you know, and I was like, yeah, wow, I actually got through I made a whole movie. Like, it was like, I actually made it, you know, because they were a little famous for their revolving door of, you know, directors in and out, and kind of switching out directors. And so there was a lot of that. And so it was always the possibility that, you know, just because I'm joining a project doesn't mean I'm going to stay on to the end.
Yeah.
And it was really exciting to be able to see it through to the end, and to actually be a part of the process that was helping make it better and helping grow the thing in a way that was actually, and like I said, learning to direct at that scale was really exciting. But I came away from that process wanting to take everything I had learned and to take it more into making a more independent project. And that's what I did afterwards. I developed a few things that were exciting, but didn't end up happening. And then The Little Prince was the film that came along that created this opportunity for me. And it was basically an independent project that was, you know, co-financed by all these different entities. So there was no like sort of studio boss.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of freedom in that. And so I took a lot of the things I had learned about the process and then brought that to that project. It was a really exciting, but then I started to really understand how hard it is to make something in CG, because
it's weird, right? Like when you're independent and you're like, oh, I wish I had a studio backing. And then when you do that, you're like, oh, I'm, you know, it's like, we're never happy anywhere. So.
Well, you know, it's like
I'm like that.
Yeah. The grass is always greener, right? The
Yeah.
grass is always greener, but the good news is, like, there's benefits to both sides, right? And you really, as long as you're aware and you learn, if you go into that, so if you went into that realm, you would have an experience and you would gain insight, and then you would come away and go, okay, where do I want to be, and what types of projects suit either side of that fence, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But I think what I feel that what you probably come out with the most is knowing how you deal with certain situations. Like, you know, if there was somebody telling you, okay, it has to be this way, but you feel strongly about it. Yeah. How do you deal with, I think that's the key, right? Like you become much more a stronger person, and you discover yourself more than you probably did before. I feel. What do you think?
I agree. And that process is like, can be like a pressure cooker, and it kind of creates this environment that there is so much pressure and the stakes are so high.
Right.
And I think that was the thing that shocked me. It was like, right, the stakes are so high because there's like millions and millions and millions of dollars, like, and there's a release date, and it has to be good, and it has to be done. And so that creates this dynamic that can really hurt the creative process. That dynamic, all those factors can actually hurt the process that is necessary to truly create something great. And that is creative safety, vulnerability, like the safe space that artists need to like do their best. And so it is a balance, right? And the thing I learned coming away from that was, because I think I was doubting myself throughout the process, doubting myself every step of the way. And you're constantly giving feedback, being told what you're not doing good enough and what you're doing wrong and what's not working, you know, you constantly, but then to get the validation at the end, to sort of have the crew love the movie, and then have the movie be sort of loved by, like, once you start getting that feedback and that validation, and then you can kind of like sift through the debris of like destruction that it took to get, you know, and you can kind of go through everything and go, yeah, you know, I was pretty sure I knew what I was doing when we made that choice. And now I know it was the right choice. And I know that it was the right thing to do, to stick to my guns. There was something that I stuck to my guns about. I really believed in it. I dug my heels in, and I'll never forget, there was a point where at this point, like, if I went back and looked at the movie, like it was life or death for me at one moment. Like I really, I wasn't going to walk, but I really wanted, and I really believed in this thing. And if I look back at the movie, I could probably figure out what it was, but it's like, I just have a vague recollection.
Sure.
And, it was like, it was expensive to go and adjust things. And so ideas like that, we've called it the plussing ideas, the ideas where it's like, yeah, what we have works, but it could work better. Right. And we were always told that if we were doing our jobs and we were getting to the finish line, that we would earn the ability to go back in and plus. Like that was going to be how we were. So it really gave us a lot of confidence. Like, okay, well, let's move forward. Like let's not get stuck in the details. Let's move forward. This works. Like, let's make it better and let's keep our list. And they came back to me and were going to allow me to plus one thing. They were going to allow me to plus and to make this idea happen. But to me, the idea wasn't just in one spot. It needed like three or four little nuanced moments to make that idea work. And to me, the one spot wasn't worth it. And I remember just saying, no, that's not enough. And they were like, okay, well, we thought you wanted to fix that thing. And I remember that was something I might have like allowed for it. Like I was too stubborn in that moment. And maybe that one small thing would have been a little bit better. I still believe the four little things would have been like, could have actually made a bigger difference.
In DreamWorks movies, aside from Prince of Egypt, Road to El Dorado, and maybe a few others, I mean, Shrek had background songs too, but in Kung Fu Panda, I don't think there were any even background.
No. It was one of the things. It was something we wanted. We didn't want needle drop in Kung Fu Panda because we wanted to try and create a timeless world. It was sort of it was a Aesop's fable kind of a world. No human beings, a sort of strange parallel universe where animals took the place of humans. In some unspecified kind of time in China. We weren't in any particular Chinese dynasty, but we were influenced by some key periods. But they were kind of a sort of mash up. But we took a lot of time to get the details right. But we didn't want to break the spell of the world we were creating by putting in sort of contemporary pop songs or anything like that. So that was something that was not usual at the time for DreamWorks films. There was a lot of needle drop. In fact, when I first came on Kung Fu Panda, I think the first script I got of the film that it was at the time had the needle drop songs kind of written into the script. I can't remember what they were, but there was a lot of kind of sort of 70s power ballad kind of stuff that was specified. Poe does something to Hurry of Speedwagon, I don't know, and I really didn't want to do that, and I don't think Mark or Melissa wanted, or anybody on our crew wanted to do that. So we wanted a classic orchestral movie score. And we were blessed to get that from Hans and John.
Great.
And Henry Jackman as well. Henry Jackman was also a big part of he composed music that went off to he was sort of, I think, a disciple of Hans's and has gone on to his own big career. And he was in charge of, I think, orchestration for Hans, when we were recording it. I think we recorded at Air. Yeah, we recorded at Air Studios in London.
I think, I don't know if it still exists. At the time in the early 2000s, Hans had this company called Media Ventures, where it was John Powell, Harry Gregson, William, and the likes of that. I don't know if it still exists, but yeah, he had a big team. I remember. You mentioned Mark Osborne. His background was in stop motion.
Yeah.
What was it working? Two directors is always tough. It can be, depending on who you're working with. Sometimes it's a blessing. What was that like? Was it a good chemistry of agreements and disagreements?
It was a good chemistry, and we definitely had agreements and disagreements. I mean, Mark is incredibly talented. He's a great guy. He's a really, really smart and super talented, great taste. the thing that was slightly tricky on Pando is that often when you've got two directors, it works very well if one of the directors tends to be front end, like pre-production, and one of the directors tends to be, has come from a like a production or post-production, then you sort of handle different things. Mark and I kind of crossed over in a lot of places, which was both good, and sometimes bad. I mean, we definitely had our disagreements about things, all in the sort of the spirit of trying to make the best film possible. But Mark is like one of the most nicest, most talented people I know, and so it was basically a really good relationship. I think, again, check with Mark. The good thing about having two directors is when you get tired, as you will, and you will hit the wall at different times, and so when you do burn out, and just have a day when you're just like, I'm out of gas, I got nothing, then the other one can go, okay, I got this, I'll and then when they hit the wall, you do it for them. So that does help, and also there's a sort of camaraderie of sort of brothers in arms, doing this kind of Herculean task of trying to get lead 500 people, to make this huge thing over years. It is really good to have someone to not only share the load with, but to have someone who understands what you're going through, because it can be a bit lonely, at the pointy end. It ultimately, I think, worked really well. I think I think we both were very happy with the movie, and so
I mean,
Mark,
it shows in the film. I mean, even the editing and the purpose of each scene, nothing like dragged for more than, not even for a second. It just felt everything was just so fluidly and organically happening. And
that fluid and organic, took a lot of backbreaking blood, sweat, and tears, not just from Mark and myself, but from everybody. From Claire Knight, the editor, from the Jen and the whole story crew, like that. It's I remember some kind of story, I can't remember whether it was Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire, but sort of being asked how they made their dancing look so effortless, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like 4 hours in the gym every day. That's what it takes to look effortless. Effortless comes with hard work. So I'm glad that it feels that way, but it was blood, sweat, and tears to get it there. I mean, it good, but those, as I said, you get a couple of scenes that just work out easily, and you get a few that are just the bane of your existence, and they just stay relentlessly ungood, and then the rest of them you just grind away. You just keep working them until they get good.
If we look back at animation before Toy Story days, right, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, my knowledge is that at that time, up until Toy Story, after that, things kind of change in terms of, okay, this is like a collaborative effort. There's so many artists, like there was all these making ofs. It wasn't that, maybe Lion King, I think, was one exception, or Little Mermaid. It wasn't there that much, as much as we know now. Like a lot of,
having an auteur drive the process.
Yeah. Like now everybody knows, I would imagine, people who are not in the entertainment industry as well, that it's a giant team effort. It takes 4 or 5 years to make a film, from conception to release. So I lost my question. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, if I can bounce off of what you're saying, like the collaboration is crucial, but sometimes when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, the soup tastes terrible, right? So that's why I say, like, to me, it works as like there's all this collaboration, but at the end, everybody's got to sort of be allowing for one road. We're all going down one road. And so when working with in a co-director situation, so like John and I, we had to agree on what that road was. you know, and Jen was also like, again, critical in sort of defining what that road was, and Melissa too, and what is that road that we're on, that we're all going to travel on together. And then it's a process of collecting everybody and showing them the target, showing them the road, so that everybody has the best chance of succeeding on that journey. But it is that one road. And I think Panda had a clear, at some point, the road became more clear. And I'll never forget, actually, it was, yeah, okay. Everybody was like, there was a point where people were so frustrated because they were like, is it a comedy? Is it an action movie? They were like, what is it? People like on our team, like brilliant artists, they were like, I just want to know, what is it? Like, what category does it fall in? And I'll never forget the moment we coined the expression, and I said, it's if Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon had Jerry Lewis as the main character.
Oh my God.
And it was like, as soon as we said that to the team, the most critical voices on the team, the most like questioning, like, what is this thing? Like, I'll never forget, like the minute we voiced that, they said, okay. And they went away and they like did
That's
amazing
brilliant.
things with that. But it was a real turning point, because it was like, that's the beauty of it. It's a real martial arts movie with a guy who really loves martial arts, but like when he can't do it.
Yeah.
And that is the most painful thing in the world for him. And the shame, and that's why I go back to cosmic shame, the cosmic shame of the worst nightmare version of Poe's experience is the most devastating thing that could happen. And that's, people's hearts go out to that character for understanding that. And I think it's something we all understand and feel and can relate to. And so I think that's okay. So I'll end with this, because it's like the craziest aspect of this. I mean, for me as a kid, my Star Wars figures were like creating like telling stories, like grew out of like the creative play with me and my Star Wars figures. And like Star Wars was my whole childhood. I was 7 when Star Wars came out, 10 when Empire Strikes Back came out. It was like, it was everything to me. And so I think all along the way, like to me, like I really understood, and you know, this idea of like wanting to be a filmmaker, and like, well, what happens if I suck? Or what happens if the films I make are terrible? It was like, well, you'll find out, right? And so at the premiere, I'll never forget, I'm sitting at the premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. It's the most surreal experience of my life. George Lucas is sitting in this, like just behind me. Like I had better seats than George Lucas.
Nice.
And I was like, I was losing it, because Oogway is a tribute to Yoda, you know, in a sense.
Yeah,
And
yeah, for sure.
and Yoda, in a sense, is a tribute to all the great mystical martial arts characters, or the characters from you know, all the great examples of Asian cinema that really brought like, you know, that sort of archetype, I think, to George Lucas. You know what I mean? So it's like, anyway, this really thing full circle. And then Jeffrey introduced him to me afterwards, and I almost lost it, because for me, that was like the moment of it coming full circle, from playing with the action figures and like wanting to make movies to like actually being there in this process and being introduced to George as you know, like yeah, that was insane. And
what did he say to you? What did he, about the film, or just about your work, or just in general? What kind of conversation you guys had?
well, I think Jeffrey introduced, like I kind of blacked out a little bit, but I think he introduced knowing what a nerd I was. And so I think Jeffrey introduced me as like this huge Star Wars nerd. So as soon as he said, well, you'll have to come up to visit the ranch sometime. Like that's when he said it. I was just like, and yeah, like it completely. And then he pointed out how when he saw the Oogway character, he leaned over to his wife and said, or no, sorry, his wife leaned over to him and said, hey, that's like Yoda. And he was like, yep. So he pointed that out. And I said, absolutely. George, and I was able to sort of share with him. I don't think I ever shared, like when I made More was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I was shooting on IMAX film, and it was all like an independent project, but I had gotten amazing help and resources to make the movie an IMAX short, which is kind of nuts. Wow. But it made it really challenging. And I had Yodas all over my set. because like my mantra was, my mantra was like Yoda inspired, and try not, do or do not. There is no try. This idea of like, are you doing this or are you trying to do this? And so I think that was the thing that propelled me, and it was the wisdom that helped me accomplish that short. And I think I carried that forward with me in a way, but it even makes it even more surreal, again, to sort of get that validation from George and to sort of, anyway, so yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, that whole circle thing is like literally like an arc in a story, right? Like, how you in
it's
life.
so ridiculous. Yeah.
But
and then to do talks, I did talks where I would talk and I would show how I made more and talk to students a lot. And I show the evidence, I show Yoda all around the room. And then when I at the end of the talk, I'll show a clip from Uguay, and it's so clearly portraying the same kind of like philosophical, in a sense, like, okay, it's a ripoff, like it's not that, I ripped off George, but at the same time, it's like, it's so true to sort of what inspired me. Like it stays, I guess it's one of the aspects of the movie that I feel, I don't know, felt rewarding to me, that it really felt like that, I really believed in certain aspects of that story, and to see those work was really, rewarding. I learned so much, because I was able to sort of kind of go off, and it's definitely weird at this point, having made now a couple of films, a couple of features, to sort of have a better understanding of the process, and to sort of process-wise, and to understand the independent version, the studio version, and to try to find those balances, to have the best of both worlds, because I think there's great aspects to either side of that, very grassy green fence,
That's the thing with films and live action, but specifically animation. Like, we go into a movie theater, watch a 2 hour, an hour and a half movie, and that's it, right? And then the amount of work that goes behind each of those films, especially animation, like 3-4 years, if you actually think about what it takes, it's just mind-boggling, and it's really underappreciated by audience in some ways. I mean, they appreciate the film, but they don't understand.
Well, they shouldn't.
I know. I'm just saying.
It's not required of an audience, and the filmmaking should be invisible. I mean, you're presenting people with entertainment, with a story, particularly if it's animation. Obviously films can do different things, but if you're making a big studio family animated feature, job one is to make people happy, is to entertain, and the last thing anybody should be thinking about is, oh my goodness, I bet this was really hard to make, and I bet lots of people had to work. If people are thinking about that, then you have definitely screwed up. People they should only be thinking about the characters and the story, and the years of work and all the sort of effort stuff needs to be invisible. That's the job that you sign up for as a, if you work in animation in whatever degree that it is that, it's going to be a lot of work, and it'll be rewarding, and most people will never get exactly what it is that you do. But if people like your film, then that's the reward.
But don't you think, I mean, there's a lot of, I think with every animated film and even live action, they also always show the behind the scenes and all that goes into it.
We did some of that on Panda. They did a APK for Panda.
But do you think that ruins the audience experience, like after they've seen the film, not before, like after they've seen the film?
I don't think it ruins it. I mean, I always, when I was a kid and I was really interested in movie making, I always found any of those kind of behind the scenes things fascinating. I guess they're only fascinating if you care about films. If you're not interested in how films are made, then they're probably the most boring thing in the world. It's like, who cares? So they're probably interesting for the people who find them interesting. I don't.
You're right, because that's what I do every time I watch a movie. The first thing I do is go to YouTube and just watch a whole slew of behind the scenes stuff. Okay, how did they do this?
I love that,
because that's my profession, right?
I don't think that is everybody by any means. I think some people, most people, they just want to go. I just want to be taken away for a couple of hours. I want to be entertained. I've had a hard day. I just want something fun or entertaining, and I don't want to think about the difficult things in my life, and I certainly don't want to think about the difficulties of what you went through to make the film. But I just let me just watch something that makes me happy at the end of a tough day. It's a I think it's a noble profession. I really do. I think it's absolutely essential, not just animation, but storytelling, filmmaking, television. Everybody needs stories to relax to, or to be challenged by, or to be entertained with, or to sort of be stimulated. I think if we didn't have that, we would be vastly impoverished as a society. I think it's a very necessary thing, and often a lot of crummy stuff gets made. Not because of I think not because people set out to make crummy stuff, just because it's really hard to make something good. Everybody wants to make something good. It's very difficult. So there's a lot of aspirations to make a good something, and very often you come up short. But I think the goal is a noble one.
I find what happens with, and I haven't seen Kung Fu Panda 2 or 3. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I have seen Shrek 2 and Shrek 3, and I find that a lot of films, when the sequels happen, because you're trying to keep the essence, but you're trying to do something more.
Right.
Whether it's live action or animation, a lot of characters get added on.
Yeah, they add characters, and it's one of the things that's hardest about sequels. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel that it's something that can be avoided in sequels? I mean, without...
Well, I haven't made a sequel yet, so I don't know what it takes.
As an audience.
Yeah, as an audience, it's one of the things I find annoying. And especially in like superhero movies when there's like 3 villains, and I'm like, God, like they have to kind of keep adding villains, right? I think low character count. I definitely gravitate towards a lower character count, and I think it can be a more enriching experience. And it's interesting that you say that, because the Furious 5, we really struggled with, there are a lot of characters in the movie, and the Furious 5 are very streamlined in how they participate in the movie. And I do think we really worked hard to boil the movie down and make it very Poe-centric, and to be very focused so that everything was relating to Poe's experience. And then once we figured out the Shifu story, we could then sort of be with aspects of Tai Lung and things that really were rooted in Shifu's story, right? Sure. So that's, I think, what helped give it that sense where it's a shrunken character count, because what's really critically important in the story is really focused on it's a triangle. It's Shifu and Tai Lung, and Poe. They're sort of participating in a triangle that is really critical to that story. So, and that was the big, I think, the hat trick. That was the hardest thing to crack, was how to get that to all feel organic and feel like it came out of the same. And we cracked it when we realized that Shifu should be the stepfather that trained Tai Lung and believed in Tai Lung as a son, and failed and broke his believing bone over his son. That was the moment, that was where everything sort of was able to sort of get solved, because it became a much simpler story and a much more compelling dynamic. And I agree with you absolutely, like, too many characters, too many ideas, because what happens in sequels, like, let's freshen it up.
Yeah.
But what's so great sometimes about an original property, or by a first movie, is like there's a specialness to that dynamic that gets created. Yeah, that you want to find a way to kind of go, well, what's a fresh take on it, or a fresh angle? And I don't know. So that's why I was happy to walk away. Like, I went off to go do other things, and I was like, Jen Nelson, like, go for it. You're amazing. Like, and we both, like, the handing of the torch to Jen. I mean, Jen was such a huge part of it, that it was such a smart choice, by the studio, and such a no-brainer. So, but yeah, I don't know how to do that, and I don't know if I want to figure it out either.
Yeah.
Actually, Little Prince, there was a notion at one point of like, could there be a sequel to Little Prince? I'm like, oh please, I can't even entertain that.
I mean, I can't say much to it because I haven't been in that situation, but you know, when
Yeah.
you're presented with that situation, and if there is a good story, and you know, naturally speaking, it's your paycheck too, right? Like you have to make
Right.
money for
Well,
what you do.
like when I heard about Kung Fu Panda 4, I thought to myself, like, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to be involved?" Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like, I would be like, that would be such a weird thing. And I would have to begin by going back and watching Kung Fu Panda, which I haven't watched in years. And I'd have to watch it again and see how what it brought up for me and how it felt. And you know, because I had to swear off watching it. You know, when you finish a movie and you go to festivals and you watch it so many times, and there was a point where I was like, okay, I need to stop looking at this. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those. Yeah, it's a tough question. But yeah, if they came to me and said, "Do you want to be involved?" I'd have to go, well, let me think about it. You know, but it's definitely a weird. Yeah, it's so weird because making the first one, like I was like, when I heard Jeffrey said at one point, like, there's going to be 5 of these. I was there when he said it to Jack.
Oh, really?
He walked into the booth. He said, "Jack, there's going to be 5 of these," and he's like, "Get ready." And later on, he said 6, but in that moment, he said 5, and Jack was like, "What?" And it was like, I'll never forget it because I was like, all right, you know, like Jeffrey bets big, right? And I was like, this is the only story. Like, I was like, this is it, like the universe. And I think that was a protective measure, like in order to sort of like stay focused on what we were doing. I was like, there's not 5. If this doesn't work, there's no more of this. Like, how can you say there's 5? So I had to stay focused on making it work. And in doing so, I think I really believed that this was the only story that existed in this universe that was worth telling. You know what I mean? Like, in a sense, like,
Yeah. It is, if you think about it, right? Like, it's going back to my question about character focus and limited characters. There's this guy that nobody has ever met. Like, you know, the audience hasn't met him yet. They've watched the first film. You're getting to know him. And then you follow his story. But once the first film is over, no matter what it is, that novelty. I think even in Star Wars or Jurassic Park and all that stuff, like, you know what? There's 6 Jurassic Park movies that came out. I mean, the first one to me is still the dearest one to my heart.
Sure. Like, you're like 6. I'm like, are there 6 already at this point?
Yeah, you know, part 1, 2, and 3, and then the new trilogy, because there was that sense of novelty. And it's funny because I'm going off topic. My kids, they can't stand the first one because it takes like an hour to build up to.
Oh my God. That's hilarious. But that was part of what was so amazing about that film. And it was part of the necessity of how they had to make that film.
Yeah.
And that's why all the others have so much more in them, because
action.
they have to top that. Yeah. We were just talking about Aliens the other night. My son had just seen Aliens and he loved it so much.
I just saw it 2 nights ago again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He loved it. And I said, okay, it'll be interesting because he's never seen the first one. And I said, it'll be interesting because it's going to seem a lot slower to you. It's going to seem smaller to you, but in some ways it's more potent. You know, and in some ways, you know, it's like what you just described about Jurassic Park. Like, it's like, but it's a lot more hide and seek. It's a lot more waiting for the thing.
Yeah.
Well,
your son should see there's an episode on Netflix on that show, Movies That Made Us. And there's a whole episode on how Aliens was made. And I was blown away by the amount of problems that film had, that James Cameron, everybody almost revolted against him.
Oh, nice.
So, but
I'll watch it. I'll check it out.
It's incredible. What are you working on next, Mark? Like, what's your if it's something that you're at liberty of sharing?
I can actually say a little bit. I mean, I've been doing a lot of different projects. Since finishing Little Prince, I actually at one point was slated to direct a trilogy of animated movies based on Bone, Jeff Smith's amazing comic, and that was set up at Warner Brothers, and it was really cool. And then it went into turnaround, and we ended up selling it to Fox. And then Fox kind of saved the day, and we got greenlit at Fox, and we were going to start making it at Fox. And then Disney decided to buy Fox, and it went away.
Blue Sky, right? Was it?
Yeah, we were going to make it a Blue Sky, and it was pretty exciting. But anyway, so that was a little bit of like so I've been doing like And that it since went on. That project had another life. Jeff tried to turn it into a series, and there was a whole other life after my time with it. But I've been doing lots of other stuff. One thing in particular that we're actually out with right now, it's called With Kind Regards from Kindergarten. And it's an adaptation of a really beloved Blacklist script from 2007, written by Adam Klein. And it's a really incredible, wonderful script that people have loved for years, and it's just never quite found its way to getting made. And so we're a couple of years deep into the process, but right now we're it's hopefully gonna see the light of day in a couple of years time. We're about at the midway point. But it's a really cool film that has a sort of a mixed media feel. It has some live action and CG animation. But yeah, that's all I'll say. I'm still looking to mix mediums, and I'm still looking to make more out of animation to kind of push the medium further, its expressiveness, and yeah.
And again, you don't have to answer this. Has it found a studio home yet, or is it still at the?
Well, we were actually making that movie at Netflix, and we're now sort of in turnaround with the project out of Netflix and looking for a new home. There's been sort of some ups and downs at Netflix that kind of resulted in some changes there, which kind of created an opportunity for us to, again, it's taking a film that we really believe in and really want to see through. My producing partner and I, Jinko Goto, are sort of opting to sort of take the film elsewhere, really as a way to sort of keep it whole, keep it intact, and keep it sort of true to the spirit of the original. When faced with it was needing to change a lot into something else to stay at Netflix, and so we're taking the opportunity to try to sort of see it through elsewhere.
Got it.
So yeah, we're kind of mid-process right now, but
somebody should make a movie on this whole process, right?
Yeah. There's always a story. It's never easy. It's never easy. I don't know why, but it's never easy.
Have you seen that new series that just came out on Paramount Plus, The Offer?
No.
It's about how Godfather was made.
Oh, okay. Check it out.
Intense. It's crazy.
Okay.
One last question,
Sure.
and I'll let you go, Mark.
Sure.
You've been talking about mixed media, right? Different facets, whether it's live action or different types of animation. To me, the first movie that ever came out, mixed media, if you want to call it, was Bed Knobs and Broomsticks from Disney. Angela Lansbury. I don't know if you've seen that, or Mary Poppins.
Yes. Yeah. Way back when.
Yeah. But the one that really tipped everything in terms of technology was Robert Zemeckis, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right?
Yes, yeah. That made a major impact on me, I think, as a kid. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, so is that something that the project that you're developing, is that the kind of mixed media that you want to get inspired from, or is it totally something different?
I mean, Sledgehammer, what I mentioned, seeing human being Peter Gabriel kind of moving in a weird way while animation was happening all around him in a real set. I think that's what started me on this road of being fascinated, and the Aha music video going from live action to it's pencil drawings, that kind of hybrid. Those are the things that really excite me. Whereas I think what was really exciting about Roger Rabbit was just how integrated and how well they were able to sort of 2D together with animation, and the way they did it. So that's a really visceral, exciting kind of the way that they pushed that concept. But to me, that's okay, that's been done. And so the things I get excited about is what can we do that we haven't seen before? And,
amazing.
And I would even say the way they did Spider-Verse, Spider-Verse blows my mind. And I so love that movie. And that to me was so much, they brought so much abstract expressionism in. Yeah. And to me, that's a mixed media film, because it's using CG in a way that we've never seen before, and breaking the rules of time and space in a way that you're not allowed to do, right? So those are the things that excite me. It's just expressionism, using the medium to be more expressionistic than sometimes it's not allowed to be, kind of gets put in a box, right?
Yeah. Spider-Verse is actually, one of the rare exceptions. I'm not a big superhero fan. I haven't really seen any of them, but Spider-Man verse, I remember my son was watching and they actually caught my attention because of the way it was done.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing.
And it all serves the story. Everything they're doing stylistically, visually, it all serves the storytelling. And that's where it's like total genius. Like the application of all those ideas is just like, that's, to me, it's 100% on my personal Rotten Tomatoes rating, you know.
Yeah, we all strive to like we were talking about, make people entertained, right? But once the film is completed, obviously it's in the audience hand, and fortunately or unfortunately, the way a movie's success is measured nowadays, or for the last 15, 20 years or 30 years, is box office.
Mhm.
You know, when the film was coming out on the Friday, what were you expecting, or was there any kind of, or even with Mark, I mean, if you can speak for Mark, you don't have to, was there any kind of fear? What if it tanked? Will it tank?
Yeah, well, of course, it was absolute terror. You know, I mean, you spend 4 years of your life making something, and what I remember was I did not want to be around for when the numbers came in, so I had asked if I could go to the premiere in Sydney, Australia. So I was in the air when flying on the Friday, and because I just didn't want to be, I didn't want the stress of waiting for the phone call, because you get a phone call to tell you how the sort of East Coast matinees have gone, and that predicts pretty much how the weekend's going to go. So
Yeah.
you can get a very unpleasant phone call or a very pleasant phone call on the Friday to say, your film's going to do this weekend, and therefore we project it's going to go on and do this. And so, on the day that it opens, you will either be you might be a god or a goat. And that stress was just way too much. So I just thought, I'm going to fly for 20 hours. No one can get hold of me. I'm going to be in a plane. I'll deal with it when I'm on the other side of the world. And I know that I was praying that we wouldn't make less than 15. I thought if we could make 15 million, we'd probably be okay. If we made less than, it wouldn't be great, but it would be okay. If we made less than 15, we would definitely be flopped, and I would probably get fired. I think the studio was hoping for somewhere between 20 and 25, something like that. So I was hoping we would not be less than 10 million less than what they were hoping.
Sure.
I think Jeffrey usually hoped for 10 million more than the studio prediction. So probably Jeffrey was wanting like 35.
And it did more than that.
I just thought, oh, there's no chance we can do that. And what I remember was when the plane landed actually landed in Melbourne, and we went to Melbourne first.
Sure.
The plane landed in Melbourne, and I'm getting off the plane, and I see somebody from Paramount, who's the distributor, waiting at the bottom of the stairs, and I'm like, oh, that's not for me, is it? And as I'm walking down the stairs, before my feet have even hit the ground in Australia, the person who was there at the bottom of the stairs said, Mr. Stevenson, your film made $60 million or whatever it made, something like that. This opening weekend, And I remember I could not process it. I remember standing on the tarmac in sort of the hot Melbourne sun, having heard that and going, is that good or is that terrible? I don't know. It was just so crazy. It didn't fit with any of the numbers I had in my head. So suddenly I was in a panic, like it was either really good or maybe it was completely catastrophic. I was absolutely like, I don't know what's going on. And it wasn't until I got to the hotel and Jeffrey Katzenberg was waiting for me in the lobby of this big hotel. And again, so again, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm like, oh no, is this terrible? Am I going to get canned and yelled at? And I think I remember literally like two gunfighters. It was a big atrium, and he was by the desk, and I came in and I saw him, and I yelled out to him. I said, "Are we happy?" And Jeffrey said, said, "Yes, I'm happy." So I was like, "Okay, it's fine. It's good. It's all good." So yeah, we made like 3 times what
Oh
I
yeah.
think the studio thought we would make. So yeah, it was surprising and relieving, I have to say.
Well, Friday it made 20 million, which was a weekend prediction, right? And then it went out to make 630 something million worldwide,
something like that.
Yeah, which is that's why there were sequels, and obviously
no, it was a success by anybody's standards, So we could all breathe out, luckily.
It's something that even the greatest of filmmakers sometimes end up deviating from, right? Because there's all this budget and effects and it's such an integral part of filmmaking, or even writing a book, or writing an article. What advice would you give to people who, whether they're trying to get into like young people, live action or animation, like how to stay true to the story that you have? And you've sort of touched upon it, but just kind of in one final say.
I think it's really important, and it's really difficult to be inspired by everything you're seeing around you and the things that have moved you, or the things that you're trying to sort of emulate. Be inspired by those things, but really try to dig down and try to find your own way of going forward down the road of the story that you're on. And you have to listen to your story. You have to listen to your character. You have to let that drive more than these outside factors of, well, we've got to make it more appealing, or we've got to, it's always a balance. Like you want to sort of like, kind of stick your head in the hole of story and like focus only on story, and then kind of poke out and sort of think about how it's going to come across to the audience, or maybe how it's going to get marketed or whatever. It's like,
sure,
you kind of have to go back and forth. But I think the best advice I could give is like, look, read the books, find out about formula, find out about why things work, but don't adhere to those formulas. Like, don't go by the book, go by your gut, like go by your heart, go really try to make yourself vulnerable in what you're putting out there. Like allow yourself to be vulnerable. And that's where you're going to do something unique and special. And you're going to, and again, like I say, I'm very grateful to Jack for the vulnerability he brought to that character. And ultimately, when I look back on it, I thought of the things that were scary to me about that process. And I was able to sort of bring some of that, and my vulnerabilities as an artist sort of definitely came in and informed how I was making decisions about how that story was getting told about that character who was dealing with the grappling with that. So it's like, find the thing in your story that is meaningful to you, or comes from somewhere in you, and find a way to build on that, or stay, because I think that's ultimately why you're doing it. That's why you're there. And even if it's a project someone brought to you, you can find your own way through the material. And it's not to say that it's the only way through the material, but that's your best chance at finding what you can bring to the table, and what you can bring to the story. And the story is going to drive itself. Like there's going to be a point where the story will dictate the choices that you need to make, and you have to listen to that, and you have to learn from what your story is teaching you, because sometimes your story will teach you, I know you love this idea, but it doesn't work. And, It's like an idea that is not actually helping. And you kind of have to let go of stuff sometimes in order to kind of let something really thrive, So yeah, sorry, long answer to a good question,
It's 100% accurate, and I truly appreciate your time, Mark.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope you had a good time too.
I did. I appreciate your time, because like it's fun to go and talk about this stuff. I haven't talked about Panda in a while, so it's neat to do that. And I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, John, for your time.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, and do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.